you as a way of making sense of this assessment task. So with this particular task, we're looking at assessment rubrics for open-ended tasks that we can use to assess student learning with the use of those assessment tasks or open-ended tasks, and then looking at elaborating and critiquing some assessment strategies, which I'll explain a little bit further in this task. Already you know a little bit about this task because you've read the EDMA 291 unit outline, and so you've got some foregrounded information about that. So it's really important that what you do is you make sure you check the unit outline to make sure that you are meeting what is expected for this task. In this one, I'm just elaborating a little bit more for you. So this is assessment task 2, and we're looking at the weeks 4 to 7 inclusive. So we're drawing upon our learning through those weeks to help us complete this particular task. What we're going to be focusing on in terms of our pedagogical reasoning and the content and pedagogical focus is looking at designing an assessment rubric that's ready for classroom use with the open-ended task that you choose, critiquing 2 assessment strategies used in mathematics, drawing on insights from mathematics education literature, and identify and explaining the intended use of those 2 assessment strategies. So we're thinking about what your future practice might look like. We decided to make a change for this in terms of supporting you with probably the more challenging parts of this assessment task, in that you can get to work with a partner should you choose. So there will be a partner element and there will be an individual component as well. This task is worth 1,200 words plus or minus 10%. And then please make sure you check out the extended unit outline for the submission date and time. Also think about submitting and using Turnitin often when you're submitting EDMA 291 assessment task 2. One of the really important things to know about Turnitin now that we can actually detect artificial intelligence use. So it's really important that you don't use artificial intelligence sources because Turnitin is now picking it up. So you need to be really mindful of that, and as staff we've been asked to pay attention to any use of AI. This is considered a form of plagiarism, it's a form of cheating, and so you need to make sure that you don't use AI to complete any part of this assessment task. So what we're looking at this assessment task is we're looking at constructing an assessment rubric that we've had a go at practicing this semester for an open-ended task that we can use to assess student achievement in both conceptual knowledge and procedural skills related to that open-ended task that you choose. You're going to present a critique of common assessment strategies used by teachers in mathematics education, in particular 2 strategies which are assessment interviews and rubrics. And you're going to offer an informed justification of the future practice of using those 2 assessment strategies when you have your own classroom. You're going to be assessed on the quality of your own assessment rubric that you will create with your partner if you choose to work with them. You're also going to be evaluated on the quality of the evaluation that you offer of the 2 assessment strategies that I just articulated, the assessment interviews and rubrics, which is the individual component of this task. And you're going to be assessed on the quality of your intended use of those 2 assessment strategies. That is also the individual component of this task. And then, of course, as always, you're going to be evaluated on and assessed on the quality of your academic writing and referencing. Just like assessment task 1, I've developed a template for you to help your pedagogical reasoning in completing this task. One of the things that you'll notice about this one is there's, again, still some advice for you where you think about what you will include in those sections. With this particular template, there will be a partner task which will be the same, and we're asking one of the key partners to upload that into Turnitin. And if you are working as the partner and you're not including the rubric or the high quality work samples, you just will include the critique of the assessment strategies and the intended use and the references. So you need to decide if you're going to work with a partner who's going to upload everything, and then which partner is going to just upload the critique of the assessment strategies and the intended use and justification of those assessment strategies. As always, make sure that you use the rubric. And again, we're looking at genuine attempts. So we'll be able to assess and evaluate whether you have had a genuine attempt. And this is what you're going to be focused on in terms of the criteria. So we are focusing on 50% of the task is actually around the assessment rubric design, because we know it's really challenging to do that. So you're going to get that with a partner, and hopefully you might choose to work with a partner so that you can both engage in the pedagogical reasoning that's required to develop a rubric that is classroom ready. We're also going to be assessing your ability to evaluate those 2 assessment strategies that I've mentioned so far, which is the use of assessment interviews in mathematics and rubrics. And we're going to see how well you can use mathematics education sources to inform your critique of those particular strategies. As always, we're really keen to know a little bit about who you're becoming. And so part of this task is looking at the intended use of those assessment strategies, where you're going to tell us how you will intend to use them in informed ways. So we want to just see you really thinking about who you are becoming, who your future self will be when you have your own classroom. And like I said, as always, academic writing is assessed and evaluated as well. So we're looking for use of APA 7 in writing style and also in your referencing style. Main thing that I would suggest here is to always try to keep the rubric in front of you whenever you are completing an assessment task and critically thinking about how you are meeting the descriptors at the intended standard that you are aiming for. Let's have a look at the open-ended task section. So this is a partner element should you choose to work with a partner. I'm going to recommend working with a partner because you're going to be able to develop and engage in pedagogical reasoning. And the reason why we've included this is teachers work in partnership all the time when they're working in schools. So with the open-ended task, you and your partner will select just one open-ended task that would impact on students' rational number understandings. You're then going to articulate the mathematics purpose and focus of that open-ended task, and then include links to curriculum documentation. So you'll be looking at the content descriptors or proficiency descriptors if you're working with the Australian curriculum or the Victorian curriculum, or you're going to look at outcomes and working mathematically statements if you're working with the New South Wales syllabus. You don't have to go too far looking for these open-ended tasks because these are available in the Assessment 2 section of our Leo site. So what we're asking you to do is select just one of the tasks that you can see there, and you're going to think about creating a work sample each for those if you're working with when you're working with your partner. Again, I will encourage you to work with a partner on this task. Not only does it reduce the workload, but also it's about engaging in that pedagogical reasoning that's so important that teachers where we can learn from each other as we engage with this particular task. I've only got 3 there, but you will notice that there are more in that open-ended task module when you go in there and have a look. What you're then going to do is create a work sample each. One of you will create a work sample that is task accomplished standard, that is a high quality response, that you would expect to see that a grade 5-6 student would do with the particular open-ended task that you've chosen. Now, it's an open-ended task because there are multiple solutions. There are also multiple ways of representing mathematical reasoning in your answers and your solutions. And one of the things we want to be able to do is think about what are all the different language representations we might use, the symbols, the diagrams, the solutions. So what you're going to do is one of you is going to say, I'll do task accomplished. So that is working at standard, what we should be expected, the expected standard for that particular open-ended task. The other partner is going to say, well, I'll do goes beyond. So this will be a response that is a very high standard quality response. You're completing it again, as I said, at the standard what you would expect grade 5-6 students. So what you could do with that is actually go and explore the idea of maybe looking at the curriculum to get an indication of what the expectations are with that. In this open-ended task, when you're creating your response or your work sample, you're anticipating the responses that child who is working at the standard of grade 5-6 and someone who's working beyond that in terms of the task. So what we're doing is we're engaging in that really important aspect of mathematical pedagogical reasoning that we need to do as teachers, which is anticipating responses. You're going to think about what the grade 5-6 student might complete. So you're going to look at visuals, you're going to look at language, you're going to look at descriptions of reasoning, so getting thought processes, explanations, generalizations if there are any, questions that you ask yourself. And then what you're going to do after it, you're going to think about, what did I do when I did this? Do I have my solutions there? This is going to help you when you develop your rubric. With your work sample, you might type it up or handwrite it, or you might do a combination of both. But you might use the curriculum documents to get a sense of what the expectations are at grade 5-6 level in terms of upper primary. So we're focusing on upper primary students. Once you've done your work sample that is task accomplished or goes beyond, you and your partner might discuss with each other and say, how do we know that this would be task accomplished? What are the expectations? How do we know that this is a high quality response that a grade 5-6 student might create in relation to the open-ended task? You can then write your comments on a separate piece of paper or type them up so that you start to get a sense of what might be included in the rubric that you develop for the open-ended task. They would be really helpful in making that start with that particular rubric aspect of this particular assessment task in ED Mode 291. What you might do is you might start to analyse and annotate your own work samples to get a sense of, okay, this is what task accomplished looks like. What should we expect to see? What about goes beyond? What about is on the way? Those things are what you might start to think about when you start to develop your rubric after completing the work samples each. So one work sample each, one at task accomplished level, one at goes beyond. Then do an analysis of it, start to analyse your work samples, and then start to annotate what the samples are. The rubric will also be a partner element, and we're looking at going from a general rubric to a task-specific one. So you've really got to think about the task that you selected, your justification of it, like what you know about it in terms of the curriculum, the articulation of the maths purpose, along with the work samples that you produced. You're then going to design a specific rubric for that open-ended task that could be used by teachers. So it's got to become classroom ready. You want to use the general scoring rubric that we've explored so far this semester to create your task-specific rubric. You're going to focus on articulating the different level progressions and what would be expected at each of those progressions. So what's expected at task accomplished? You're going to have multiple descriptors for each of those levels in your rubric. You've got to have focused descriptors that are clear. You don't want someone who's looking at your rubric thinking, this is unsure, I don't know how to use this rubric, or the comments in this or the descriptors are too general. This could apply to any task. So you've really got to think about the mathematics that underpins the task, along with what the content is, and also what the proficiencies and ways of working mathematically are. So this is not unfamiliar to you. You've seen this semester so far. And so what you're going to do is create this task-specific rubric going from the general to the specific. So what do you put on the content side? Well, these will be the ideas, the understandings, the knowledge and the concepts that are about rational number that relate specifically to the task that you've chosen. The processes and proficiencies are the ways of working mathematically. So think about, how did you work mathematically? What would you expect? What procedures did you use? What representations were you expecting or should be expecting to see at each of those levels? What are the strategies that a student might use in grade 5-6? How would they explain their thinking? Make generalizations if they make any. Maybe making generalizations is going further, and if so, what kind of generalizations would that be? What about communicating thinking and reasoning? My advice is always to start at task accomplished. Start at that level, and then you can work backwards by paring back the idea of what you would expect to see then at substantial progress. And it's not just a matter of deleting some of the descriptors that you have, but it's a matter of reworking them in a way that a teacher be able to clearly see the progression going from little progress to some progress, substantial progress, task accomplished, goes beyond. We want this to be a classroom-ready rubric that any teacher will be able to pick up because of your important pedagogical reasoning that you've done. So remember, with your rubric, you're designing it for the open-ended tasks that you've selected, and you're going to use your work samples and annotations to inform that rubric. You're going to have a content focus on the rubric and a processes and proficiencies ways of working mathematically as well. We've got to see progression in your rubric, this idea of being able to use it to identify where children are at and using it as an assessment tool. My advice is always start at task accomplished. I find that the easiest place to start, and then you can work backwards, and then you can do that goes beyond by extending and pushing those descriptors. You will have multiple descriptors in each of the cells. It's not just a sentence, it's not just a word. You're going to have some multiple descriptions there because you want to bring the teacher's attention to what to look for at each of the progressions in your rubric. You're then going to move to a critique of the assessment strategies, and this is where it's going to be an individual task. What you're going to do is you're going to look at literature sources and see what they are telling us about assessment interviews and rubrics in maths education. I want to stress that. You've got to use maths education sources at the expected level for this particular task. So to get a pass, you must use maths education sources. You're going to present an evaluation of those two assessment strategies, assessment interviews, rubrics. You're going to provide an unbiased, balanced, and informed presentation of the advantages and the disadvantages of both of those strategies, as informed by your reading of the literature. You're going to include references to maths education literature, of course, because you're, in a sense, you're presenting like a little mini literature review of which critiques. So it's not just about saying that interviews are bad and rubrics are good, or rubrics are bad and interviews are great. That's not an appropriate critique. You're going to provide a balanced, unbiased, and informed presentation of the advantages and disadvantages of both. I want you to think about including how would teachers use those particular strategies as a form of feedback to primary school students. So what advice is there in the literature? If there is no advice, what advice could you provide that extends upon what you've read in the literature sources? After you've done that, you're going to then think about yourself as who you're becoming as a mathematics teacher. So we want to see a bit of you in this part. We want you to think about your future career as a maths teacher. And we want you to articulate and justify your intended use of those two strategies. What are you going to do that's realistic and informed? You're going to make references again to maths education literature to show that you've been able to say, I get what these authors are telling us what effective teachers would do with those particular assessment strategies. And if you would like to gain extra marks, you're going to present a very thoughtful, practical and insightful way of mitigating obstacles that might impede your intended use. There's always going to be obstacles in what we do as teachers. What we need to do is find clever ways of working with those obstacles and turning them into opportunities. So what we want to see is, can you take what you've read from the literature, think about it and synthesize what that might look like. On the Leo side, I've given you some ways that you might start thinking about this. So I've got some leads for you. These are freebies. But what we want you to be able to see is, can you use these literature sources well? These are just three. What we want you to do is go beyond. We want you to think about and access the literature and start to see and do literature searches for appropriate sources to help you with this task. The rubric talks about using mathematics education sources well. What we mean by that is a synthesis of the information that is in those sources. You're not going to tell us what Sexton said and give us a paragraph about Sexton and what he has to say. You're not then going to give us what Holt told us in 2020 and give us a whole list of things that Holt told us. What we're looking for you to do is start to see patterns across what the authors are saying and start to present a really highly synthesized and informed, unbiased presentation of the advantages and disadvantages of assessment interviews and rubrics. If you're not sure where to start, I've got some advice in the EDMA 291 unit outline, but here are some sources that you might check out. We've got access to all of these in our ECU database. So when you go to the library site, you can click into journals, you can type the name of the journal, and then you can start to search within the journals by putting in something like mathematics assessment interviews. See what hits you might get. These can be really helpful in terms of research, and these are quite academic, so they will have lots of ideas about how to use them and how researchers have used particular assessment strategies. And these give some really practical advice, these particular journals, because these are professional journals that are written specifically for teachers. What do we mean by using literature well? Well, to get above the expected level and well above, it requires a clear critique and an exemplary critique. So what we're really looking for here is using literature well means understanding what the authors are saying, paraphrasing their ideas and putting it into your own words. You're going to connect those messages with those ideas with messages from other authors, possibly looking at comparing and contrasting. Who's saying things that are the same? Who's saying things that are different? You're going to use more than one source. You're going to use a source more than once or twice, if that's true, for your literature review. Here are some really important questions that you can use when you are looking at these particular sources. These are questions that I use whenever I do a literature review. I think about what are the authors saying about the topic, or in this case, about the assessment strategies we're looking for. What are the advantages of the assessment strategies? What are the disadvantages? What are they saying about that? What authors are saying something that is similar? Are any commonalities coming through what you're saying? Is one author saying something that's quite unique, saying something that's different from the others? So these are really helpful comprehension questions that you can use as you dive into the literature sources as a way of making sense of what the authors are saying. Online sources will be the AST2 library. I use that a lot and I find that really helpful, but I also use Google Scholar. Google Scholar is where I do what's called ancestry mining, and I'm going to tell a little bit about what that means by looking at the citations of that and also looking at what references are used. If I find a really good paper, I read it, I go, this is helpful. I then go to the reference list and see, have those authors used any references that I think I should use? The Merger website is also really helpful. If you go to Google Scholar, you can see here that I've put in the name of one of the free texts that I've given you. When you put that in there, you actually start to see the article name, which is in purple, and then you see the author names, which is in green. You might see a little bit about the abstract. What's interesting though is you can see the number of citations. When you click on that number of citations, you get a sense of how many people have used that in terms of how they referenced it. So this article was published in 2011, and since that time, 32 people have used that as a reference. And what's nice is you can click on there and you will actually get a list of all the citations that have used it. So I use this quite a lot, and I think it's really helpful, and it helps me in cutting down some time, but also helps me to find lots of different literature that might be helpful. Now, some of the citations they use they might be not helpful, and so what I need to do is carefully read and see how it's been cited. As always, use Turnitin often, and so you can use it as often as you like up to the submission date, and you can upload drafts to see if you are paraphrasing enough. This is really important because we are being asked to be more vigilant about cheating and plagiarism because there's been an increase of that. I've shared not to use artificial intelligence because it is actually coming up on our Turnitin reports, and we can actually see who is using artificial intelligence. The university is starting to develop a response to this, so we want to avoid that. So please do not, I beg you not to use that, because we don't want to chase you up if there are any issues around that. You must upload in one document, and like I said, you're going to decide what partner is going to upload everything and which partner is going to upload just the critique of the assessment strategies. And make sure you start using Turnitin to improve your writing. You can use it as many times as you like. put it in there, upload it, see what's coming up. Have I paraphrased enough? I want to avoid any kind of email that says, I need to talk to you about turn it in report. You want to avoid those kind of conversations because they're not fun to have. When you're using the turn it in activity, make sure you check your campus, scroll down to assessment 2, and then you upload in there. And these are the grade descriptors. So we get a lot of questions about, why was expecting a high distinction? Well, high distinction, if you look at ACU, is an exceptionally high quality of performance for the assessment task. Demonstrated as an exceptionally high standard of learning achievement in relation to learning outcomes. So high distinction means, if you're in third year, high distinction means that you're working at fourth year, almost ready to be in the field, ready to have your own grade and talk around pedagogical reasoning of that level. So we need you to work hard. Getting a high distinction is not impossible in the EDMA unit, but you've got to work hard for it. And we know that about the assessment tasks in EDMA units. They're not ones that you can complete the night before. But we want you to engage in that really important pedagogical reasoning because that's what's going to make you the best teacher you can be. So as always, make sure you go back and check the EDMA 291 unit outline and cross-check this with some information. And everything that you have there is on the Leo site so far. If you've got any questions, send them to your campus-based LIC and they'll be able to help you out. Good luck with this assessment task.
Cái tinh thần của cái người lữ hành hy vọng như thế nào không ạ? Và cái chiều thức hy vọng nó quan trọng.